The sun burned hot over the dusty village square, where merchants shouted prices and children ran through narrow lanes chasing laughter. But in the middle of all that noise, one figure moved slowly, almost invisible to the crowd. It was an old woman, frail, thin, her back slightly bent under the weight of years and hardship. Her clothes were faded, patched in more places than whole, and her sandals looked ready to break with each step. In her wrinkled hands she carried a small worn bag, clutched tightly as though it held the last piece of her dignity. The crowd noticed her, but not with kindness. Some chuckled at the way her scarf hung loose. Others whispered cruel words under their breath. A group of young boys pointed and laughed as if her weakness were entertainment. Shopkeepers turned their eyes away, unwilling to waste even a greeting on someone who looked so poor, so insignificant. Yet she did not answer. She did not raise her head, nor did she defend herself. She moved with quiet steps, her silence louder than all the mockery around her. It was as if she had come for a purpose that no insult could distract her from. The villagers, however, paid her no mind. To them she was nothing more than a shadow, another forgotten soul fading into the dust of poverty. They thought she was just an old beggar, someone with no story, no value, no place in their world. But what they didn't know was that behind those tired eyes and that frail body lived a truth so powerful, it would soon turn every mocking smile into stunned silence. The old woman stopped at the very center of the square. Her bag rested at her feet, her hands trembling slightly as she looked around at the faces staring back at her. For the first time she lifted her chin, her voice cracking through the air like a whisper carried by the wind. The laughter around her faltered. People leaned closer, curiosity rising where mockery once lived. No one cared who she was, until she finally spoke, and the words she carried in her heart would not only silence the square, but shake the very foundation of the entire village. The scene fades. The moment hangs in suspense, a truth hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed. Long before she became the frail figure wandering the village square, the old woman had lived a life far different from what the villagers now believed. There was a time when her name was spoken with respect. Her home had been filled with warmth, her days with purpose. She was known not for riches, but for kindness. The woman who would open her door to feed the hungry, who would lend her hands to neighbors in need, who would smile even when life tested her. But kindness, as the narrator reflects, does not always guarantee protection. Her downfall began not with strangers, but with those she trusted most. A relative, perhaps a brother or an in-law, coveted the little land she owned. Papers were forged, signatures faked, and soon she found herself stripped of her home. When she sought help, doors that once opened to her suddenly shut. People turned their faces away, not wanting to involve themselves in her troubles. Then came the second blow. Her family. Some were taken by illness, others by poverty, and those who remained drifted apart, leaving her to face the world alone. The woman who had once been surrounded by voices and laughter now sat in silence, her heart echoing with memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She tried to fight back, to reclaim what was hers, but in villages like these, the powerful held the pen and the poor were left with nothing. Slowly, piece by piece, everything she valued slipped through her fingers. From a respected woman, she became a wanderer. The flashback shows her sitting at the edge of different towns, begging not because she wanted charity, but because hunger left her no choice. She would take scraps from market stalls once the vendors had thrown them away. At night she slept beneath broken roofs or by the side of roads, her only blanket the same worn scarf she still carried. And yet, despite all the suffering, her eyes never lost their quiet strength. She endured humiliation with silence, but inside her heart carried truths no one could erase. The villagers who now laughed at her never cared to ask her story. To them, she was simply another beggar who had wasted her life. They saw the wrinkles, the trembling hands, the torn clothes, but they did not see the sacrifices behind them. They never asked how much she had once given or how much she had lost. What they could not see was that every scar, every wrinkle, carried a story of betrayal, sacrifice, and survival. They saw only her poverty but not her pain. They saw only her weakness but not her strength. And so they dismissed her, never knowing that one day, her voice would echo louder than all of theirs combined. As the flashback fades, we return to the present, the frail woman standing in the square clutching her worn bag. The crowd still sees her as nothing, but the truth of who she really is and why she has returned is about to surface. Morning in the village square always began with noise, merchants calling out their prices, children running through the dusty streets, women haggling over vegetables. But for one figure, the morning was nothing more than another test of survival. The old woman shuffled slowly, her steps heavy but steady, clutching her worn bag against her chest as though it contained the last pieces of her life. Her scarf, frayed and faded, shielded her face from the sun. She tried to melt into the background, but in this village, invisibility was impossible. The first insult came from children. They spotted her near the well, bending to collect water in a cracked clay pot. "Look at the witch," one boy shouted, laughing as he picked up a stone. Another joined in, and soon a handful of pebbles were thrown, hitting her weak arms, bouncing off her shoulders. She flinched but did not cry out. She simply adjusted her scarf and kept walking, as though their cruelty was nothing new. "Go away," a woman snapped from her shop door. "Don't scare my customers with your dirty face." The old woman lowered her head, whispered an apology she didn't owe, and turned back into the crowd. At the bakery she paused, inhaling the smell of fresh bread that made her empty stomach ache. But before she could step closer, the shopkeeper raised his broom. "Not here," he barked. "You won't get anything for free. Move on." Her eyes lingered for a moment on the bread, then dropped to the ground. With quiet dignity she walked away, even as her legs trembled from hunger. Everywhere she went, whispers followed her. "She's useless. Where are her children? Probably abandoned her. Some say she was cursed. No wonder she's alone." The words floated through the air, sharp and merciless. Some laughed openly. Others spoke in hushed tones. But not one person offered her kindness. To the villagers, she was nothing more than a shadow of misfortune, a burden to mock, a reminder of everything they did not want to become. And so they hardened their hearts against her. But what they did not know was that her silence was not weakness. It was the weight of truths too heavy to share, secrets the village itself had buried long ago. Later that evening, the old woman found a quiet spot near the temple steps. She sat down, pulling her knees close to her chest, listening to the fading sounds of laughter and music drifting from nearby homes. Families gathered for dinner. Lamps lit up windows and warm meals filled tables. She, however, tore a small piece of stale bread she had managed to find in her bag, perhaps given to her by a stranger in another town. She chewed slowly, her tired eyes fixed on the ground. A group of young men passed by, their voices loud with mockery. "Still alive, old hag? You'll haunt this place even after death," one sneered. Another added with cruel laughter, "Maybe the spirits keep her here. No one wants her in heaven or hell." The group moved on, leaving behind echoes of their laughter. The woman did not respond. She had long stopped defending herself. Her silence became her shield. But deep inside, every word struck her heart like a knife. She wondered how people could so easily forget that once she too had lived among them, laughed among them, cried among them, shared her bread and her stories. Had time erased her so completely? Or had their greed and gossip chosen to bury her truth? That night, as the moon rose high over the village, she whispered softly to herself, words only she could hear. They were not curses, not bitterness, but fragments of a vow, that one day when the moment came she would speak. And when she did, the same voices that now mocked her would fall silent. The villagers thought they knew who she was. They thought she was nothing more than a beggar, a shadow, a curse. But behind her silence lay secrets that could shake their world. Secrets the village had long forgotten. The screen fades on her tired face, her eyes glowing with a mix of pain and strength, as the village sleeps unaware of the storm she carries within her heart. Days passed, and the old woman remained the invisible shadow of the village. Yet every so often tiny cracks appeared in the mask she wore, flashes of a past life that refused to stay buried. One afternoon, she sat on the temple steps while a group of boys argued loudly about history lessons from school. The king who built the old fortress was Raja Haran, one boy declared confidently. The others nodded, until the old woman, without raising her eyes, murmured, "It was Raja Virendra." "Thought Haran." The boys for Raja Haran came. Her voice was soft but carried a firmness that left no doubt. "How would you know?" one demanded. The old woman only shrugged, pulling her scarf tighter. "Because I was there when the fortress was opened. I saw the procession." The boys exchanged uneasy looks. "She's mad," one whispered, and they laughed it off before running away. But in their laughter lingered unease. How could a beggar know such precise details? Another time during the village market, a wealthy merchant bragged loudly about his imported fabrics. He mispronounced the names of foreign cities, showing off knowledge he clearly did not possess. Without looking at him, the old woman corrected softly, "It's pronounced lion, not lion, and those silks don't come from there. They come from Surat." The merchant spun around, glaring. "What would you know about trade routes?" Her eyes, sharp for a fleeting second, met his. "I knew them before you were even born." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but the merchant laughed it off quickly, shoving her away with a scoff. "Crazy old woman. Don't listen to her ramblings." The villagers chuckled nervously, choosing to dismiss the incident. But whispers began to spread. How could she know these things? Sometimes her hands betrayed her. Despite her ragged clothes, she would lift a cup of water with the poise of nobility. Her fingers curved in the refined manner of one trained in etiquette. When she bowed before the temple idol, her movements were graceful, precise, the way only someone taught in old traditions of the court would know. A few elders noticed, frowning to themselves. And then there were her eyes. When children sang folk songs, she sometimes closed her eyes and whispered additional verses, ones no one else remembered. When young brides spoke of family rituals, the old woman would gently correct them, saying, "No, child. In those days we did it differently, with respect, not haste." Most villagers brushed these things off as the ramblings of age. "She's senile," they told each other. "Her mind mixes truth with madness." But a handful of people began to wonder. An elderly priest who had lived in the village all his life watched her carefully. Once he asked, "Old mother, where did you learn these ways? You speak like someone raised in wealth." The woman only smiled faintly and turned away. Some things are not meant to be spoken. The villagers laughed. They mocked. They dismissed. But each subtle clue was a thread. And one day all those threads would weave into a revelation they could no longer ignore. She walked through the village that night with her scarf pulled tight, her shadow long under the moonlight. The bag she carried swung gently at her side. Inside it lay the final proof of her identity, something no one had seen yet. And though the villagers still mocked her, curiosity had begun to take root. A storm was quietly gathering. The village square bustled with noise and color that day. Lanterns swayed, children laughed, and vendors shouted over one another. It was the annual festival, the one time in the year when the whole community gathered, rich and poor alike. But beneath the music and cheer, tension brewed. A heated argument had broken out between two influential families over land boundaries. Voices rose, accusations flew, and soon the entire square was divided, half shouting in support of one side, half cheering the other. The old woman sat quietly near the steps of the well, her frail figure ignored as always. She clutched her worn bag tightly, watching the chaos unfold. People pushed past her, some even mocking, "Keep your distance, old hag. You wouldn't understand matters of land." But then, something shifted. The dispute grew uglier. One man shouted about ownership records, another accused the priest of hiding documents. Fists nearly flew. The crowd turned restless, murmuring with anger. And then, for the first time in years, the old woman rose to her feet. Her back was bent, her hands trembling, but when she spoke, her voice was startlingly steady, clear enough to cut through the roar. "You fools," she said. The crowd froze. Every head turned toward her, shock on their faces. For the first time, her tone carried no weakness, no begging, only authority, the kind that silenced even the most arrogant. "You argue about land as if it belongs to you," she continued, her eyes burning. "But do you even know the truth of this village? Do you even know who first built these walls? Who signed the records you now twist and corrupt?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What nonsense is this?" someone scoffed. The old woman straightened slightly, her fragile frame seeming taller than ever. "I was there when those papers were signed. I knew the man who owned this land, Juan, and the promises he made that your families broke." Whispers erupted. The priest narrowed his eyes, staring hard at her. "How could you possibly know that?" The woman's gaze swept across the crowd, unflinching. "Because I carried the seal myself. Because once this land was mine." The square fell into stunned silence. Children stopped laughing. Vendors stopped shouting. The same villagers who had mocked her only minutes before now stared wide-eyed, trying to grasp her words. One of the landowners sneered, though his voice quivered. "Lies, you're just a beggar. Don't speak of matters you can't understand." But the old woman only stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. "You think me a beggar because I wear rags. You think me weak because I walk alone. But I remember when this village bowed its head before my family. I remember when honor still mattered before greed poisoned your hearts." Her words struck like thunder. The priest whispered under his breath. Could it be? He remembered fragments of stories told decades ago, of a family that had vanished, of betrayal and land seized in silence. The villagers leaned closer, their disbelief mixing with fear. Who was this woman, really? For years they saw only rags. They mocked her silence, her weakness. But in that single moment, her voice shattered the illusion, and every villager began to question, had they spent years insulting someone who once held power over them all? The old woman's bag slipped slightly from her hand, revealing a glimpse of something inside, a faded document sealed with wax, or perhaps a jewel too fine for a beggar to own. Gasps rose again. For the first time, no one laughed. No one mocked. Instead, a heavy silence fell upon the square as the villagers stared at her with wide, uncertain eyes. The festival music had stopped. The shouting had ended. The question now hung over them all like a storm cloud. Who was this woman? And why had she returned? The silence in the square was suffocating. For years, the old woman had been nothing more than a shadow. A beggar who lingered at the market's edge, a nuisance chased away from doorsteps. But now, as she stood tall despite her frailty, the weight of her words pressed on every heart. Her hands trembled as she reached into the worn bag she always carried. Slowly, carefully, she drew out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. The crowd craned their necks, eyes widening as the cloth fell away, revealing documents yellowed with age, their edges frayed, but their seals unmistakable. "These," she said, her voice steady, "are the deeds of this land, signed by my husband, witnessed by your fathers, and sealed under law." Gasps rippled through the villagers. The landowners who had just been shouting now stood pale, their arrogance melting into fear. The priest stepped forward, squinting at the documents. His lips parted in disbelief. "This seal, it is real. This signature, I remember it. My father spoke of it before he died." Murmurs swelled like a rising tide. "It can't be. All these years? We mocked her. She was the rightful one?" The woman raised her chin, her voice carrying like never before. "Once I was not a beggar. I was the wife of the man who built your homes, who gave land to your families, who paid for the very well you drink from today. We fed your hungry, we clothed your poor. But when my husband died suddenly, betrayal came swiftly. Those I trusted turned on me. My land was stolen, my home taken, my name erased, and I was cast out into the streets." Her words struck like lightning. People who once laughed at her now lowered their heads in shame. Children clung to their mothers, sensing the gravity of her revelation. One of the wealthier villagers, his face red with guilt, shouted desperately, "Lies! You have no proof beyond these old papers. You are nothing now." The old woman's eyes blazed. She reached once more into her bag and pulled out a small silver locket, its chain broken but its engraving clear. She held it high for all to see. "This belonged to my son," she said softly. "He was taken from me when I was cast aside. I don't know where he is today. But if he still lives, he carries the same crest engraved on this locket, the crest of the family you stole from." Gasps turned into cries. Some villagers clutched their mouths in horror. Others exchanged panicked looks, realizing the depth of what had been hidden. In that moment, the crowd no longer saw a beggar. They saw a woman who once held their futures in her hands. A woman stripped of everything, yet still standing before them with dignity. Tears welled in the eyes of the younger villagers. A child whispered, "Mama, is it true? Did we treat her so badly?" The mother could only bow her head, unable to answer. The priest lowered himself slowly to his knees before her, shame heavy in his eyes. "Forgive us," he whispered. "We were blind." The old woman's gaze swept over them all. Those who mocked her, those who ignored her, those who never offered kindness. "You thought me..." Her voice trembled, but I remained silent, waiting to see what this village had become without honor. And today, you have revealed yourselves. No one dared to speak. The air was thick with guilt and fear. The beggar they shamed had become the judge of their souls. And as the truth settled over the crowd, Every villager asked themselves what punishment or forgiveness would she choose. The village square was silent, broken only by the faint rustle of the old woman's worn clothes as she steadied herself. Faces that once sneered at her now burned with shame. The same mouths that mocked her begged silently for forgiveness. She looked at them. The merchants who drove her away from their shops, the women who spat cruel words, the children who were taught to throw stones. Each one stood frozen, hearts heavy under the weight of guilt. Her voice rose, trembling but clear. When I had a home, I opened its doors to you. When I had grain, I filled your bowls. When my husband still lived, he gave you work and land. And yet, the moment I fell, you turned your backs. Not one of you reached out a hand. You watched me starve. You mocked me as if I were dirt beneath your feet. The crowd lowered their eyes. Some wept quietly, realizing the cruelty of their silence through the years. She paused, clutching the silver locket close to her chest. A single tear traced her wrinkled cheek, but her voice carried both pain and power. You took my dignity, but you could not take my truth. And now each of you must live knowing that the beggar you despised was the very woman who once gave you life. The priest stepped forward, tears streaming down his weathered face. He fell to his knees, whispering, "Forgive us. We were blind, and we were cruel." Others followed, bowing their heads, unable to meet her gaze. For a long moment, the old woman said nothing. The weight of years of humiliation pressed upon her chest. Then she lifted her head, eyes glimmering with resolve. Her choice was simple, but it would define the village forever. She drew a deep breath. I do not seek revenge. I do not seek riches restored. But I leave you with this. Let your shame be the teacher you denied me to be. Treat the weak with kindness, for one day you may find the beggar you mock is the very hand that once fed you. Gasps spread across the square. Some wept openly, realizing she had chosen mercy, not vengeance. And with that, the old woman turned. She gathered her worn bag, clutched the locket close, and began walking away. No one dared stop her. No one dared call her back. She left them with no punishment but the mirror of their own guilt. And sometimes that is the heaviest punishment of all. The villagers stood frozen in the square long after the old woman disappeared down the dusty road. Their laughter was gone, replaced by the heavy silence of shame. Her words echoed in their minds, louder than the bells that marked each hour. Let your shame be your teacher. Would you recognize wisdom if it came dressed in rags? Would you bow to truth if it spoke from the lips of the poor? Or would you, like so many here, turn your back until it was too late? The camera lingers on the villagers' faces. Regret, guilt, and the painful sting of realizing they had mocked the very woman who once gave them everything. Do you judge people by their appearance, or by their heart? The image shifts to the old woman, her silhouette fading into the horizon, her worn bag against her frail shoulder. The silver locket glimmers faintly in her hand, a reminder of secrets yet untold. She walked away in silence, but her story was far from over. For beyond the mountains, someone else still searched for her, someone who might hold the final piece of her hidden past. And when they arrive, the village will learn that the truth they just uncovered was only the beginning. The screen fades to black, leaving behind tension, mystery, and the promise of something greater yet to come. What would you do if the beggar at your door turned out to be the very person who once gave you life? Would you ask for forgiveness? Or would your guilt be too heavy to bear? A pause, then a call, firm and clear. If you want to discover what happens when the stranger searching for her finally arrives, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell us, do you believe forgiveness is the true power? Or is guilt the only punishment that lasts forever?